Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Also, I just want to thank you for giving me an extra day here, just due to some travel for work. I got in pretty late last night and spent some time analyzing the models and just saw a pretty significant pattern change, and I want a little more time to analyze it. So we're coming to you early on Tuesday morning here to kind of see how things are shifting around. So what you're looking at, first of all, is the history of the jet stream through the month of June into the very beginning of July. So June 1st to July 1st. And remember, back at that time period, we had seen this quite extended piece of the Pacific jet that at times extended all the way to the Pacific Northwest. There was no split. Nothing went north and south in this part of the Gulf of Alaska. And the ridge developed kind of right in here. And this is what sent parts of the Mid-South getting into the southern plains over into exceptional drought. We saw a lot of ridge-riding storms, a Canadian storm track, cooler than normal conditions in the northwest, but drier to the south and hotter to the south. That was the pattern that we saw in June. Now, since then, this is how things have shifted around a bit. So now what we notice is that the pattern has really lost a lot of its momentum. It's broken up into several pieces. For example, a lot of very fast winds pretty far north here, but look at how much farther to the north the jet stream is here. And notice now that the ridge has backed up a little bit farther to the west, while stronger winds are coming around this, I keep calling it this, Hudson Trough that sat somewhere in here. And what this has done is it's taken the ridge here at the beginning of July. That's what we're looking at here, the beginning of July. It's taken the ridge that's over the Mid-South and it's pushed it back toward the Four Corners states. We can also now see two components of the jet stream coming into the Gulf of Alaska. Well, if you remember back to some of the things we were discussing, it was about any shift at all in the trough that was here was going to be significant to a pattern change. We've now seen that trough move its way back toward Alaska, even parts of the Bering Sea, and that's allowed the jet stream to really just push a bit farther to the north here and bring heat back to a significant portion of the west and change the pattern up across the Midwest and the east. And so that's going to be the narrative we're going to kind of carry through this. Now, leading up to this, the last 7 days of total accumulated precipitation, of course, this past weekend, we've been talking about this in the morning reports. This was the area that really saw quite a bit of precipitation. It got into New England as well. We still see our scattered daily convection along parts of the southeast, getting into mid-Atlantic. And just storms kind of dotted throughout the northern plains, but a lot of severe weather here throughout the Canadian prairie. The places that have been missed are maybe better seen if I just take off everything below an inch. So here's the same map with everything below 1 inch removed. And now we can really start to identify where the heaviest precipitation was. And then most places that you now see in white likely had the majority of that moisture evaporate over the last few days. But very heavy rainfall in parts of southern Illinois and Indiana. A lot of flooding here in this part of Indiana. And then pockets throughout the Appalachian Mountains back toward the Mid-South here. And then some heavy rain down here in the southeast. I also don't want to exclude the heavier rains we saw around the mid-Atlantic too. But just taking a look at this, I want to show you what's been going on in the Canadian prairie by looking at a hail map. Let's shrink that back up. This would be the 16th through this morning, looking at hail reports from the MRMS data across the United States. So a few days ago, big hail in parts of Nebraska, but a lot of storms just ripping through the Canadian prairie, and a lot of folks are kind of putting out pictures of some of the damage that's happened from Alberta and Saskatchewan over into Manitoba. And last night, these storms really hit this part of Montana and North Dakota pretty hard as well. And just for completeness, there were some severe wind reports in parts of the southeast. But just going on my Twitter feed here, Lauren actually works for us at Nutrien, and she took this picture. She is in... let's go take a closer look at the picture there. So what some of the hail look like in her part of Alberta. But she is in Bow Island, Alberta, which is right here where this storm went through, producing some substantial hail. So a lot of damage into this part of Saskatchewan as well. And she wasn't the only one posting pictures throughout the Canadian prairie. Let me see here. I had it. There it is. Benjamin, I put this in my Monday report. Just an incredible amount of damage to his bean crop. The beans, these are edible beans here, just ripped to shreds by some hail. So our friends north of the border here are really taking a beating with respect to severe weather. And we've had a very active storm track through there. So we have big questions about whether or not that's going to continue. So I'm going to take you to a map I've been showing you quite a bit. It's the last 30 days of precipitation. This goes through yesterday morning on the 18th. And you can start to see some pockets dotted throughout the western Cornbelt and getting over here into pockets of the eastern Cornbelt that are still in drought. Even this place here in Indiana that saw so much rain over the weekend is still only at about 60% of normal on the month. So we needed a lot more precipitation than that. New England, we have better news for New England going forward to beat back some of this drought. But again, our eyes are always just drawn to what's going on in Kansas, Missouri, parts of western Kentucky, Tennessee, through Arkansas, back in Oklahoma and Texas. That is our mid-south to southern plains drought we've been so concerned about. Very active southwest monsoon, Canadian storm track. We've seen a lot of above normal precipitation in Montana and this part of North Dakota, but a lot of this has come with some very severe weather, including some incredibly strong winds just yesterday. What you notice over here, being so dry as of late in parts of Idaho, we had a big fire that broke out. I'll show you that in just a few moments. But I'll take this map and then flip it over to some soil moisture just to see that there are certain places where there is not much moisture to take from the soil or from the vegetation given how dry it is. And again, a lot of that centers on this part of the mid-south and southern plains, but dotted throughout the western Corn Belt and pockets in around the Great Lakes and into New England. Still very dry in places. These are important maps to kind of watch evolve. Now, what's changed? Because we always like to do the long range first. Well, watch this animation reset back on the 18th of June. Our La Niña persists. It's still out here. These trade winds are strong, but watch the North Pacific. See all the warm, very warm water that's showing up between Hawaii and the Aleutian Islands? We've eliminated the warm water that's here in the Gulf of Alaska. Watch it just disappear once we get into the month of July. There it goes. And we've seen extremely warm water north of Japan in the Bering Sea. And the net effect of this is to kind of sensibly warm the lower atmosphere as well. They kind of go hand in hand. And this is pushing our jet stream farther to the north. And that's why I started off by showing you how loopy the jet stream is in its more northward progression. And it's eliminated the deeper trough that's been here off the west coast. And the elimination of that's allowing the heat to pull back to the west, and it's going to change this precipitation pattern in a big way going forward. And this is what we saw in the last couple of model runs. So 500 millibar height field, troughs are in blue, ridges are in red. And what we see here is that as we play through Wednesday and Thursday of this week, the pattern continues such that the troughs that were here are now much more focused over Alaska. So that flow's coming around and then cascading through the prairies and then kind of just pulling around a broader trough that's been sitting somewhere around the Hudson Bay. So what that's done is that's allowed the ridge that was here to just back up. Now, if the ridge is still sitting over the Four Corner states, this whole area tends to just be hotter and drier, as does the west in this pattern. But that just gets us through Friday of this week. Going out into next week, again, we start to see some weak ridging here, but the flow is still doing something like this. And while we've broadened out this larger area of higher heights, which is going to keep the southern plains hot, this whole pattern is not such anymore that it's got a large ridge that's here like it did in parts of June. So you can see the difference, right, in the shape of those lines. But just keeping going out here to the 25th, 26th, and 27th, the models are attempting to block up a bit across the west coast. You can see the broader trough that's developing kind of runs through the eastern Canadian prairie and down into the Four Corners, into the Great Lakes, But the broader ridge is just opening here. And that's going to send for the first time in a while, especially to the Pacific Northwest, just some sustained heat. We combine that with subtropical ridging that's happening in this area, and we're kind of pumping in moisture around it. We're going to have systems rolling through, and that's just going to increase the precipitation pattern in a way that we really need to see if this trend is going to hold. So what I want to show to you, and this is in both the GFS and the European, what I want to show to you here is the 0Z European model run. We're going to look at a 5-day anomaly, and what we can see here, all right, we start off with that very potent storm system running through right along the border, and it'll eventually wrap up here into the Hudson Bay. But very hot and very dry for many to finish out the rest of this week until the weekend. Once we get into the weekend, you're going to start to see better chances of storms rolling through this area. And as I play this forward, there you go, you can start to see that. So the 5 days that end on Tuesday, we now see better storms in parts of the Midwest. And then as we just keep this going, notice how the model's getting out there day 5 through 10, which is here. So that gets us out to the 29th. That's the 24th through the 29th. And then beyond that, just continue to increase the precipitation for a broad area. Now, just a caveat about this, these are ensemble averages, which means not everybody in this whole area is going to see above average precipitation. What it's telling us is that pattern is just favoring more chances for bringing in precipitation, which a lot of folks in this area desperately need, as for much of the crop in here, we're at that critical time in the reproductive stages for it. So as we play all the way back to the beginning of August 2nd, 3rd, that seems to be the way the pattern will still hold. And we know that we're averaging a lot of things here, but this pattern change was pretty significant over the last few days. We'll talk more about the model trend in a second, but I want to get to that bigger picture here. So I just kind of stitched together a couple of maps and put these in my morning report, but we've got Tuesday through Saturday here. We're going to watch that active storm system today running right along this dashed line, but late this weekend, keep an eye in this area for storms. We continue to stay very hot and dry in the south and southern plains, but diurnal storms still kick off down here in the southeast. But that time period of the 24th through August 3rd, the ridge backs up west, and this is just kind of a summary of what we expect to see changing during that time period. All right. From here, I want to show you the European Ensemble probability of getting an inch of rain in the next 10 days. And the most significant trend that I saw was right here in this part of the Midwest, eastern Cornbelt, eastern Great Lakes into New England. That was an area that in the latest runs increased the probability somewhere between 50 and 90% a chance of getting at least an inch of rain. Now, of course, these are going to be delivered by thunderstorm. That rain will be. So they'll be locally heavier amounts, but we're looking for that overall pattern adjustment, and it just seems to keep showing up in this area. What could make all of this wrong? We should ask that question. That ridge has to back up west in order for this to occur. Imagine it doesn't. Let's say that the model's got it wrong and the ridge stays right in this particular area. Well, that will start to eliminate the heavier rain probabilities where I'm kind of shading in here. It's going to push it farther to the east. So we have to watch out for that. If we lose any of the depth of the Hudson Trough that's sitting up here, that also prevents that northwest flow, which kicks off so many thunderstorms at this point in time in July and August. That's another thing to be on the lookout for. And if we see any shift around in the subtropical high that's off the map here, but that's delivering the moisture for these, then this won't verify either. So I'm letting you know the things we have to watch, but at this point, the model trend, I think, might be the more important factor going forward with this. Now, that La Niña is still very much there. You just notice that over the next 15 days, the trade winds are still very strong. So that part of the narrative hasn't changed. What's interesting, though, is the westerly wind bursts that are showing up in the Indian Ocean pushing against it. And what this is effectively going to do is it's going to take our MJO, which spent some time over here, shoot it way over here back over to Africa, and then it's going to come right back across. So the MJO is going to spend, I think, a lot of time doing this over the next couple of weeks, sitting in between, well, the maritime continent, which is Australia, and Africa. And to be honest, the teleconnection here is relatively weak, and I think some of the longer range models are struggling with that. So let's go take a look. I'm not showing the CFS-V2 because it has bounced around so much the last couple of weeks that it's the variability is too high to put any sort of trust in. But what you've been looking at here is the new outlook released last night from the European model looking at August. Now, the reason why it continues to put drier conditions here, running kind of from the Midwest, Western Corn Belt down into the Southern Plains, this is still very consistent with the La Niña pattern, as is the wetter conditions across the east and the active southwest monsoon. Something to take note of is the models, because they're trying to back that ridge farther to the west, are now starting to spread more of that monsoonal moisture farther to the west rather than having it curl really hard like this across parts of Colorado, which has had some spectacular thunderstorms in the last few weeks here. If I had to make adjustments, I think we actually see a more active Canadian storm track than being advertised. The models have underrepresented the rainfall here for a while. I would also say that this area is likely going to see more storms than what's being alluded to here, probably much more closer to the climatological average. I'm struggling to figure out where that westward extent is of those thunderstorms, though, but the line I just drew would probably be the most representative at this point. August temperatures, well, you can imagine with that larger ridge in the west, that's where we're going to be keeping the heat. So you notice that here all the way through the plains, the above average temperatures. But I think we might have more shots at seeing some cooler days, just a couple of them swiping through here, while the heat likely stays on in a big way for parts of the southern plains. I think that's a pretty consistent forecast. We'll also see more sustained heat in the Pacific Northwest, in parts of California where temperatures have not been hot, in the Pacific Northwest, for this whole summer until about the last week. On the hurricane side of this, we're not watching anything right now. So the National Hurricane Center, no tropical systems are expected. And I was just looking at some satellite imagery this morning here as the sun was rising. And we do have quite a bit of Saharan dust that's in place. But you just notice there are no large clusters of tropical thunderstorms, no easterly waves to be on the lookout for coming off of Africa, and really nothing getting kind of homegrown here. I'll be honest, we do worry this time of year about these weak fronts that often slice through, producing some convection in the Gulf or right off the East Coast. They can initiate weak tropical systems that deliver rain. I just don't see that right now either. But I'll just mention again, I'm watching the end of the month for better tropical activity along the monsoon here in Africa to produce those easterly waves. We've been talking about that now for a couple of weeks. We just need to see if that continues to verify. And remember, the beginning of August is where hurricane season really begins to ramp up. So that's kind of our long-range perspective on things. Let's go back to the near term. And I got to start you off with some satellite imagery, because this morning, as we watched the sunrise, there's that deep low that last night produced the severe weather in parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan and parts of Montana, North Dakota. This is a very tightly spinning low, not very common in summer to see like this. I would expect to see this more during the cold season. But if we come back to last night, take a look at this. So red flag warnings were issued for parts of Idaho and Montana yesterday. But just take a look at the extent of the smoke coming from this fire getting pulled into that low here while these massive storms erupted out ahead of it. That's just, it's kind of a breathtaking image there to see that smoke move into that low. So very, very strong winds. They shifted out of the west 60 to 70 miles an hour at times, some places even higher, and fires broke out. We also saw, let's just take you down here real quick, we saw fires in Texas last night as well. You can see this very large fire here showing up here just in central Texas. But you can also see the curl around that big subtropical ridge. Just kind of an amazing way to see that. Okay, where we're going in the near term, we still have excessive heat watches here, heat advisories in this shade, and then the heat warnings in place. But there are red flag warnings throughout, and we have the strong winds still coming out of parts of Montana into North Dakota, South Dakota. And those winds are quite strong at this point. Excessive heat in the Central Valley of California here toward the San Joaquin side of it, and also in New England as well. So over the next week, because the heat is not transitioning out of the southern plains, not even close, we do expect to see evaporation rates here exceeding 3 inches. That's what's in white. But this whole area, this is 1.5 inches to over 2.5 inches of potential evaporation on bare soil. That could be happening here. And we expect it over the west at this time of year, but this is the region that's going to be quite high. On the severe weather side of this, before I come back to the temperature discussion, we're going to keep an eye here today in the upper Midwest. Some scattered storms down in the southeast as well that could be strong to severe. And tomorrow on the 20th, it's going to be here in the Ohio River Valley up toward the eastern Great Lakes. We're going to keep a close eye. And then that front slides east, hitting New England, but stretching from the Carolinas all the way back to the Red River Valley of the south by the time we get into the 21st. All right. Now, just to show you what's kind of what's initiating all of this, it's that low right here. So as we play this forward, almost all of our precipitation, except for what's happening over the southwest monsoon, through this afternoon and this evening, getting into Wednesday morning, afternoon and evening, and then eventually out there toward Thursday, all the way to midday. It's just that low curling up, dragging that front through that's going to initiate those storms. It's going to be very difficult to predict when and where they're going to form along this very weak frontal boundary here. But you can see where the model's attempting to do that through Indiana and Ohio, Kentucky and Tennessee, stretching back up into Michigan and eventually into parts of Ontario. So that'll be the main culprit in the near term. But the next 7 days by this morning's Wpc forecast, a lot of what you see right in through here, this is going to be coming later this week and weekend. We have our diurnal storms on weak fronts down here in the southeast. There's the southwestern monsoon. We have that low here today that's rolling up into the Canadian prairie, the eastern Canadian Maritimes over the next couple of days here. European model, let's take a quick look at it today. You're going to see those features moving through. So we've already looked through Wednesday and into Thursday. So there goes our first low, and you can see the front still lingering in the southeast. Behind it, there's a second low that curls into that Hudson Trough right here, and they kind of combine. And they do leave, this is pretty amazing, they leave this long front that through Friday night is going to continue to initiate storms down here across the south. But then what you'll see is getting into Saturday midday, Saturday evening, we start to see, wrapping out of this low, a weak frontal boundary that could open up this corridor towards storms, which is what we were talking about, seeing the storms coming through parts of the western Corn Belt, upper Midwest, and maybe through parts of the Great Lakes into Sunday. Now, after that, on Sunday, the models have been pretty consistent with leaving a lingering boundary that connects up with the southwest monsoon right here. See that? And as we go forward, that boundary just slides slowly from New York all the way back to, well, Kansas and Missouri. And we're going to watch Sunday night into Monday morning for showers and storms along that frontal boundary, which could really provide some needed rainfall. But those systems that keep rolling over the top of that ridge, which is set up here, the next one comes through Canada by Tuesday. There it is. See the front it's putting through the United States? That one swipes through on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, and that's pretty robust in the ensembles as well. But if we just look at this all and just say, well, what about those next 7 days? Here's system number 1. There is the weekend chances of rain coming in here. Look, this is Saturday and a Sunday. And then as we go out there and let's just leave it right out here on, this is a 7-day forecast right there on Monday. We can see who's missing out on a lot of this, parts of the plains, especially the southern plains. When compared to the GFS model, the European is more aggressive on the weekend rains here and also on the current system rolling through. The GFS is wetter where you see these colors. The European is wetter where you see these. So the model differences here are substantial, and at this point the European has got the higher skill score, just to keep that consistent. But we come back to the same thing. The ridge by day 10 is here. There's no longer a trough of low pressure off the west coast. It's moved, so the flow comes up and over. And what that ends up doing here is increasing the precipitation chances in this area for week 2. But look at how the model has progressed. This is, again, the week ending on August 2nd. This is what it looked like from the previous run, and this was 2 runs ago. So what it's done is it's really shown a more northward trend in where the heavier precipitation is going to be. And that's what I was looking at last night, saying I need to see one more run to see if this is consistent. Let's finish up with a quick discussion on temperature. I was coming over here to one of my favorite sites, looking at the globe over the last week. These colored dots represent where there's been near record highs, and these would be near record lows. And if you just watch, we're going to keep an eye on the United States, and we're going to see in Europe. Those are the 2 places that are currently enduring substantial heat waves. And if we take a look at the current U.S. heat wave, yeah, we got another very hot 110 in parts like this is central Oklahoma. And while some cooler air comes into the northern plains today, you see that by Wednesday it's already heated back up into the 90s. By Thursday, we're pulling 97 in parts of western Iowa, 103 in parts of Nebraska, and broad scale warmth across the western part of the United States. There's Friday, getting into the weekend on Saturday. Our first push at some cooler air in the northern plains again. That's Saturday, but as we go into Sunday, the heat just stays on here in parts of the Mid-South and the Midwest. 103 in St. Louis. That's going to be hot on Sunday. It sticks around for Monday. Overnight lows. We were up deep into the 70s this morning here, but as we get out there toward Friday, into Saturday and Sunday, see the 70s creeping back into the Corn Belt here? This is not what we want to see during pollination in this particular area. Kind of our 5-day sliding window. Whoops, sorry, I thought I had this made for you here. I'll show you how I do this on weathermodels.com. Great website here. I like to use some of their content. Let's look at that 5-day moving average. Let's get this up and running. Go back to the 0Z run. There we go. You're just going to notice that the most significant change is with that pattern shift that's showing up here day 5 through 10. See the cooler weather coming in there? As we just play this on out, what you're going to notice is the heat stays in the west. The pattern off the Pacific is flattened out. And that's where we start to see possibly relief in the heat here while it pushes back to the west. It's all happening with the loss of that trough over the west coast, which is why we covered that. I also want to point out big ridge sitting over Central Europe, and that's a part of why the heat wave in Europe is still very much on. Extremely hot from the Iberian Peninsula through France, Germany, Poland. It's even getting over here into parts of western Ukraine. And the precipitation side of it, there will be isolated severe storms that'll roll through this part of the country, or the continent here, excuse me. But overall, it's a drier pattern for much of Europe as we look forward here in the forecast. Okay, one last thing. I'll just let folks you that are paying close attention to the cotton market. A lot of heavy rain in India, hammering cotton fields in this area. Sorry, it's playing kind of slow here from this NASA data set. but you can see it right in this area. That's the spot I'm going to be watching. So I want to give you a quick international update here as we finish this up. Thanks so much for a little bit extra time. I'm heading off to South Dakota tonight, and I'll be back later on in the week and look forward to just keeping you posted on what's going on with the weather. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks.